Hey everybody, I just want to say it's great to be here. I'm very happy, I'm very excited. And first of all, I actually want to give a big thanks to Peter and Vanessa for organizing this amazing event like for every single year. Thank you so much. So today I'll be talking a little bit about what we're seeing in CSS in 2016, like what are some of the trends, some of the things that we're seeing there, some of the layout features, and then I'll be talking about some of the new features with module number 4 that are coming up. So first, a little bit more about me, I guess, right? Who's this guy standing in front of you? So I'm a front-end developer. I've been coding for the web since I was 11, 12 years old. I've been in the United States for 4.5 years, and I'm still having a blast. I was originally born, as many of you, in Belgium, and in my free time, I just love to sail. There's nothing beats it like just sailing under the Golden Gate. This is my Twitter handle as well. There's quite a lot of links and quite a lot of resources in these slides, and I'll be posting them after the talk. So to get started, I want to talk a little bit about some of the best practices and trends that we're actually seeing these days. How many people have heard about this tool called Browser Sync? All right, great. So if you're developing any CSS, this is a highly recommended tool. What it basically is going to do, one of the nice things it does, it's live injecting your CSS into your browser. One other nice thing it's doing is, as you can see here, is if you have multiple browsers open, like you have Firefox, you have your Chrome browser open, Internet Explorer as well, and then you're scrolling on the page and you can actually see that happening in all these multiple browsers. So just for like how it looks like, if you want to find a certain bug or something to reproduce anything, this is a really good tool. So this is a little bit of inception, I guess, right? So on the left, you see the slides that I was developing earlier, and on the right, you see my editor. Right here, I'm using Atom, but you can use Sublime or any other editor that you want to. And what I'm doing here is I'm just saving, right? I'm commenting, uncommenting certain things, and then as soon as I save the file, it's not even reloading the page, right? So it's just injecting that piece of CSS. So your state, if you have any state in your web app, it doesn't change. This is a huge performance benefit for your productivity, basically. It's also pretty easy to set up. During the talk, I'll usually use Gulp, but you can also use Grunt, Broccoli, or whatever other tool that you want to use for your build system. One of the big things, I think, if you just think about CSS and on big websites as well, is that you'll see that CSS basically blocks the rendering of your page, right? So you start off with a very small CSS file, so performance is okay. However, then your site starts to grow and grow and grow, and your CSS becomes like a very big blocker, especially on the initial loads. So there's multiple ways to solve that problem, and one of the ways is the one I'm presenting right here. It's called critical CSS. So basically what I would do, this is the event page actually from tonight. So basically what you would do is you would say, okay, what is the thing that's going to be above default? Right? It's going to take all the classes that are part of that. It's going to strip that out from your CSS, and it's going to put it in its own separate CSS file. One nice thing that I would suggest doing as well is that piece of CSS, you actually make that in line. Why? Again, like performance-wise, and then all the other non-critical stuff is actually going to be loaded asynchronously later. Another option that you can see here is the minify true, right? Basically, it's going to minify your CSS. The width and the height, that's just for saying, okay, what is my what is the thing that is for me going to be critical, right? And think in this case, it's just a small phone size. Again, I'll be asking for this more, but like, how many people know about linting? All right, that's good. How many people know about CSS linting? All right, that's a little bit less. Okay, so basically, lint tools are the things that are going to make sure that your code looks the same in all these different locations, right? Like you have your one project, and then you have all these different CSS files. Well, you basically want to make sure that your CSS looks kind of the same. You don't want to use like tabs in one, spaces in the other. So these are a couple of tools, and I think I'll just run over them. So the first one is CSS Lint. I think that's the oldie from the block. It's been around for quite a long time. I think you can still use it today if you're just using CSS. However, it doesn't really have Sass support or less support. Then for SCSS Lint, That one, it's really good. There's quite a lot of users of it, but the only thing in there is like it actually depends on Ruby. So you have this Ruby dependency to set it up with Travis. Like there's ways to do that, to set it up with the continuous integration servers, but it's not always the easiest way. So next up is CSS Lint. That one is nice as well, but it doesn't really have any support right now for custom rules. I think that's coming in the next version though. And then the one I'll be discussing today is Stylint. And one other nice thing is this post-CSS thing, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. So how does this work? So again, this is my editor, and in this case, I'm not even saving, right? I'm just changing some things in my file. And I'm actually getting constantly like these errors that you can see on the bottom. So it's saying like, hey, you make sure that you use a new line when you have this curly bracket. Make sure your hex values are actually just lowercase. And make sure all of these properties are alphabetized. And again, like what we're trying to do, you can just do this for your own project, but especially for bigger projects. If you receive any pull requests from any open source project that you're doing, you don't want to have to say to people, hey, just remove these 2 spaces or remove this tab in here. You basically want the build to fail, even before you have to merge. So you're basically scripting that piece of yourself. Again, pretty easy to set up. And if you're using post-CSS, the other recommendation here is to use something like Reporter. It's just going to make your messages look way cleaner in your terminal. I think, especially the last couple of months, there's been a pretty big debate and just discussion going on about icon fonts versus SVG. But what you do see is that that's definitely moving in the SVG direction. A couple of things here, like rendering issues. Like if you have a 1x display, it actually has some like sub-pixel rendering issues in certain laptops. The other thing, it's actually not good for accessibility at all. A lot of people just overlook that, but what some people are doing is they're changing their font, and when you change their font, you just see these blocks, right? You don't even see the icon, and they don't know what that thing is going to be when they're going to click on it. And the other thing is, authoring is pretty hard. Like there's 2 ways to do it, or you have these huge fonts, right, which you have to load completely before you show any font on the page, or you pick and choose, but just the authoring tools so far aren't that good. So the solution is, if you have any icons, basically try to use SVG. And the other very nice thing about it is that you have multicolor icons, which are not the case with icon fonts. I'm definitely not the only one talking about this. GitHub just, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago, even while I was making these slides, they actually moved everything over to SVG. This is the other thing I was talking about. So basically what's happening is it's rendered without icons first, and then the font is getting loaded. And as soon as the font got loaded, then you see the icons. With SVG, you would just see the icons right up there. So the user experience is actually better as well. Here I'm just including like a little SVG animation just to show how simple it is to animate anything. If you're trying to do this with a font icon, I think you'll have quite more work, I guess. How many people have heard about this thing called CSS Modules? I think this is okay. It's actually one that's pretty recent, but I think it has a lot of future ahead of itself, I guess. The big thing about CSS as well is usually scope globally, right? So if you have any framework that you're including and you have this other library and then some other CSS from another person and then you have your own CSS. Well, if you just have a regular class name, something like .text, well, usually what's going to happen is there's going to be a conflict somewhere. There's other solutions like using the BEM or the OOCSS methodology. However, it doesn't really feel natural to write these long class names yourself. So can't we do this in a better way, basically? The nice thing here as well, it has very explicit dependencies. So like there's ways to do hierarchies. And it's basically a more modular and reusable version of CSS. So how does this look like? The first thing I would see as a front-end developer, it would scare me a little bit, actually, if you just see .normal, .disable, .error again, because you see those things and you're saying, that's probably going to be a conflict somewhere, right? So, but we're using CSS modules, and you said it was just locally scoped. So, okay. Then we have our JavaScript. Basically, you just say, okay, import all these styles from my specific CSS. You just use styles.normal. And I think this is some of the secret sauce that you see on the bottom here, is you can still find out, okay, what's the file name, what's the class name, and then this unique value at the end is basically going to make sure that you don't have any conflicts. So this is just the basic example. If you want to go a little bit further, in SAS or in less, we have this thing called extend. So it works in a similar way, but it's not exactly the same. So what it's doing here is you can say your common class, and you're basically saying, okay, make sure you have all these styles, and then you're using that in normal and error as well. However, the nice thing is, in your JavaScript, you actually don't have to know about that at all. So this is exactly the same thing as you saw 2 slides earlier. You can just use styles.normal, and it's going to make sure that those classes are actually going to be added correctly. This is the last one, I guess, for the CSS Modules piece. It's also possible to make sure you have it from other files. And the syntax actually looks a lot like the latest JavaScript import syntax. All right, up to another very fun one, which is called CSS Layouts. A lot of people know about floats, I guess, about clearing floats, about these clear containers, about like, hey, you have these BRs and you kind of make them hidden, and like, what? Like, we should not be designing for the web that way. There should be a different way, a better way to do this. So the CSS specifications, there's actually 3 big ones, I guess, Flexbox, multi-column, and grid. They all have their pros and cons, and I'll just run over them. So here we just have a living example, and the thing that we wanted to do is we have this OS Goes USA, right, the main title, and then we have this Flexbox thing, and we wanted to float like just under it and go to the left. It's perfectly possible to do that with JavaScript, for instance, but currently with CSS, it's pretty tricky if you would like to do that without anything like Flexbox. I have to say, out of the box, it's very easy. You just do display flex. However, there are quite a lot of options. I'm actually providing a whole resources list at the end of this presentation as well, with some guidelines. I think the CSS tricks one is great, and I think that's the way I learned everything myself as well. The support is really good. In certain browsers, it's definitely still recommended to have some prefixes, and again, we'll have a solution for that later on. So this one is the multi-column one, CSS multi-columns. This is, I think, amazing for a lot of different sites, where you can just say, okay, this is your blob of text. You have 3 columns. Just do your thing. I don't want to have to say like this specific height or something. No, just 3 columns and fit the text in nicely. And as you can see, the text is actually wrapping from one column to the next. So again, the setup is very straightforward. You say how many columns you have, the gap in between, and then the rule, which is kind of like the border in between. The support here, as you can tell, is like, hey, it's green, but not as green as the other one, right? Like, what's happening here? So there's actually a couple of properties where you can just use specific values, but those are supported across browsers. I think especially WebKit is still catching up and making sure that they actually support all the different values in there. Next up is CSS Grid. I think this is probably going to be the end of floats. Maybe that's a pretty big statement, but that's what I guess I really hope. I think this is going to be especially for like big page layout as well. So under the hood, you basically specify, okay, which are your template areas, right? And then within each class, you also say, okay, this is my actual grid area, so that's the way they're linking up. And then you can also say, okay, these are going to be the gaps in between. However, having said that, I would not recommend using this in production right now. It's great for experimentation, and there's a lot of articles and a lot of actually books coming out about it, and browsers are getting more and more support for it. However, this is probably the dream that's going to come true in a couple of months or year, maybe. So last but not least, I want to talk about some of the cool CSS features. I'm just picking actually the ones that we are able to use today. So how would you be able to use them today? Well, there's this thing called CSS Next. It's also a post-CSS plugin. It actually includes auto prefixer. So wait, what is auto prefixer, right? So what does that do is it's basically saying, okay, this is what you're writing. The thing that's on the left, that's what you're writing. You're saying display flex. Then you run it through your gulp, you run it through your grunt or webpack or whatever you're using, and then it's going to output all your prefix, like WebKit or MS or MOS, for all the different browser versions. This is huge, right? You don't want to write the thing on the right yourself, so you basically want to generate that as part of your build. Next up is custom properties. I do have to say it's quite getting used to, especially to the syntax, like these dash things. But after having used them for a while, I actually like it a lot. You can also do calculations with them. So if you, for instance, have an H1 and you say calc and you just do times 1.2, it's actually going to work. And so again, post.css is going to transform the thing that you see from input.css into output.css. Custom media queries. Again, if you're working with people, with a lot of different people on your project, then what you'll see is that everybody's going to try to define their own viewport size, their own breakpoints, and it will be like one will be at 500 pixels, the other one at 625, and like how do you debug that? So a nice thing here is what you could do is you would be able to have one file that would actually define all your custom media queries and then say, okay, these are the ones we're sticking to, and if anybody's changing that, please at least let us know. Next up is custom selectors. This is super easy just super useful for reuse. This is a very simple example, but you can also, for instance, say, okay, what if you hover over one of them, right? That's when it becomes extremely useful. Then the color function, another one. If you're working with a lot of designers and you're saying like, oh wait, what is that hex value again? Well, I know what white is, but just a little bit darker, a little bit blacker than that. Okay, you can actually do that right now. So it just gives you as a front-end developer, while you're sitting together with a designer, just a little bit more power, and you can just do it a little bit more fast, like a little bit faster. I think this one, it sounds really weird, but this is a very big one for me. I love to use the hex notation, but it's always bothered me that I couldn't set any of the opacity for it. So the 4th digit or the 8th digit, like the 7th and 8th digit, I guess in this case, would basically say, okay, this is the opacity that you have. And with that, I want to say, so these are all the different resources that I would definitely recommend. Just check them out and see how you feel about them. And definitely, like, there's so much knowledge in there. And with that, I want to say thank you to all of you. Right.